Okay. Good morning and welcome to Pennie's Community Partner Workgroup for March 2023. We're happy to have you and thank you for being virtually present today. My name is Marie Ortiz. I work in operations and I'm here to help facilitate today's session. It's truly a pleasure to be here today and present today's agenda. We worked hard on creating the content to deliver to you today and hope that you find the information valuable. Before we get started, let's go ahead and cover some housekeeping items. This call is being recorded through and conducted through MS Teams Live. If you'd like to review the content at a later time, you're welcome to do so on our website, agency.pennie.com. You click on Workgroup. To limit background noise, all attendee lines are muted. We have Pennie team members monitoring the chat for any general or clarifying questions you may have. Customer-specific questions can be answered by the Pennie Dedicated Assister Broker line at 844-844-4440. Next. Here we have a visual of where the content resides. We've also facilitated the URL for your convenience so that you can access the materials at your convenience. Next. Diving right into our agenda, today we're going to cover Pennie reminders and updates. We'll have discussions around upcoming system enhancements, operation updates, including PDM and the unwinding. External affairs will cover resources, and we will cover questions and feedback, time permitting. All right, so let's get started with the reminders. The first reminder we have on here relates to triaging questions through the Pennie Contact Center. As previously stated, the Contact Center is truly the first line of defense. We have listed the phone number there for your convenience. You can also create a ticket to pose your question through the platform. We've talked before regarding best practices, such as noting your ticket number, what it addresses, providing a good callback number and the best available time to reach you, just to prevent the back and forth phone tag. We also discussed ticket processing times last month, which we've hyperlinked the presentation there for your convenience. Specifically, slide 11 will cover ticket processing times. And if and when escalations are needed, we just want you to know that there are supervisors available at the call center to help triage and resolve your concern. They also know to refer cases to us if and when additional guidance is needed. The second reminder we have for you today is regarding customer communication alerts. This is the text email alert options that we make available through the application and on the portal. Specifically on the application, primary contact info section is where you would indicate the contact information as well as select the boxes for SMS text alerts or email alert options. And once on the portal, through the customer view, you have my preferences, which you can also check the boxes there. In that section, you'll also see the paperless and postal mail options for Pennie notices and 1095A forms. We stress and highlight these communication alert options. Working in operations, we've noticed customers who are unaware of upcoming deadlines or really not informed as to what the next step is. And for that reason, we want you to encourage your customers to sign up for these alerts, because that way, Pennie notice is sent, they get a text or email alert and they know to go look for that communication. Very, very important. The third reminder we have for you today is to let you know that we are in QLE SCP tax Path to Pennie season. We did have an SCP refresher in January's session. We have hyperlinked both the deck and the recording. 22 minutes into the recording, you'll find the QLE topic. In addition, we have listed here hyperlinked some resources for you to use, such as the SCP Quick Reference Guide, as well as FAQs on this topic. So be sure to use those, save them to your favorites, and refer to them when needed. Next, please. Pennie is in the process of updating our appeal form. Specifically, there are 2 new questions that will be added to the appeal form. For step 4, we're going to ask the customer to tell us what they're seeking from the appeal, specifically what is their desired outcome. Step 7, we're going to ask if the customer needs an interpreter for if a hearing is held for the matter at hand. We never want language to be a barrier if a customer chooses to have a hearing for an appeal. Towards the end of the appeal form, we're also adding an appoint and authorize representative form just for easier access and completion. We're aiming to have this form take effect April 1st, and we're going to add it to the customer resources on the agency.pennie.com website. And just a friendly reminder to please use the forms that are located on our website, not the ones that you may have saved to your local drive, just to ensure that you're submitting the most up-to-date version of the form. Next, we have Board of Directors meeting. As we just had the Board of Directors meeting on February 24th and did receive Board of Director approval on the 2024 Plan Certification Policy, which we'll be covering in future session. In the interim, if you're interested in taking a look at the recording, the deck, or the agenda, we've listed hyperlinked, the agency.pennie.com, as well as a specific board meeting materials page for your convenience. Next. All right, let's dive right into upcoming system enhancements. First, we have eligibility application enhancements. So the first one on here involves catastrophic plan shopping disclaimer for those who are eligible for APTC and CSR. As you may or may not know, catastrophic plans are not eligible for financial assistance. So we just want to include in the plan shopping experience for our customers a disclaimer that lets them know that financial assistance that they're eligible for cannot be applied to this plan, just so that they can get the max out of the savings that they could qualify for. Also, with this enhancement, we'll be updating FPLs for Medicaid and CHIP eligibility. As far as assister and broker portal enhancements for brokers, we are enabling or adding a filter to search for customers who have open verifications, and you'll be able to filter by DMI deadlines. We'll take a look at that later on so you can see what it's going to look like. For assisters, we are granting the ability to create assister tickets. And for the broker portal, we have the ability to create tickets for customers who have not claimed their account. So before this enhancement goes through, so like currently, if a customer clicks on ability to create, prior to this, a broker was not able to create a ticket for a customer who had not claimed their account. And now, regardless of claimed versus not claimed, they're able to create that ticket for that customer. Phone, chat, and login updates. So we are going to have live chat available within the secure customer portal. This is intended for customers. Once they log into their Pennie portal, they will have that option to chat with a live representative. We are also adding a case number to Pennie customer notices so that when a customer calls in, they can plug in that number into the IVR and help us auto-identify who they are. Customer activation emails, forgot password, but customer doesn't have an account yet. This is that function where, say I'm a customer and I think I have an account, but I don't, and I click on forgot password. Prior to the enhancement, that attempt is going to fail because I don't have an account. However, with this enhancement, regardless of whether I have an account or not, I'll be able to click on forgot password and be able to obtain the email to help me log in or create an account. For assister and broker login, really for non-customer accounts, this is a very important update to just advise that if you don't log in to your accounts within 60 days, your login will be inactivated, and this is a security requirement. You can always call the Pennie Contact Center if this happens, and they'll go ahead and reactivate your login successfully. Next. Here we have a screenshot of what the catastrophic plan shopping experience will look like. Specifically, you see that catastrophic plans are not eligible for financial savings, and we're just, reminding the customer that they're not taking advantage of the financial savings that they're eligible for if they choose a catastrophic plan. So that is just a quick screenshot of the message we're delivering to them in the shopping experience. Next, please. Here we have screenshots for the brokers being able to filter and search for customers with open verifications. On the left-hand side, you'll see the drop down for the filter for applicant verifications. You'll be able to choose an option based on, the DMI due within 15, 30, 60, 90 days, and even the ones that are past due but have not expired yet. On the right-hand side, you'll see the customer's status, their DMIs, and their due dates once you select the individual. And of course, this is a great benefit because it will assist you with your outreach to your customers to create awareness and help them provide the documentation that is needed in order to satisfy the DMI. Next, please. Here we have the assister ticket creation enhancement. On the left-hand side, you'll see the navigation from the dashboard, which will now include my tickets. When you click on that, it'll land you to the ticket history dashboard where you'll see the blue new submit new ticket button on the right-hand side. And you'll be able to submit a ticket that includes the subject and the description. Hit submit. That will submit your ticket. If you go back into my tickets, you'll see the history of your tickets, the subject, the status, create and close date from that screen. And just a note that the ticket is associated with the assister's account, not specifically to the customer's account at this time with this specific enhancement. Next, please. And here it's just, additional screenshots to illustrate the functionality that will be made available to you. You'll have a comments box as well where you can post comments to the tickets that you create. Next, please. All right, so the live chat function within the secure customer portal. This is a screenshot of what it will look like as far as once they're logged in, they click on help and support, they will select chat, and the box on the right will come up, which is essentially that box is what they see now through anonymous chat. The difference here is that we're just adding this function to the secure customer portal for them to be able to chat with us once they're logged into their account. Next, please. With respect to the case numbers that are going to be added to every Pennie customer notice, we just want to point you to that number in case you need to provide it to the customer. Once logged in through the member view, you will see the case ID number under overview, which is the screenshot on the left. You can also find the case ID under current applications, which is highlighted there for your convenience. So that's where you'll find the case ID that the customer will receive on their notice that they will use when they call the customer line to enter into the IVR so that we can auto-identify that caller. Next, please. All right, now I'm going to hand it over to my colleague, Joe, He will cover FPLs and other material for you. Take it away, Joe.
Thanks, Marie. Today I'm going to be going over the changes in federal poverty level for 2023. There's changes to income eligibility thresholds that will be coming to Pennie in March of 23. The eligibility change is specific to Medicaid and CHIP. Those will be using the new 2023 federal poverty level tables. The eligibility for subsidies, APTC and CSR, are going to continue to use the existing 2022 tables for the remainder of plan year 23. So there's a chart here on this slide. I'm not going to go through every number, but the important piece is if you look on the right-hand side, it shows you which poverty level table you should be using. So for Medicaid and CHIP, we bolded that it should be 23. Any CSR level is still using the plan year 2022 FPL levels. Next slide. Okay, now we're going to be talking about periodic data matching. We call it PDM. Next slide. Thank you. So PDM ensures that our customers that are receiving advanced premium tax credits and cost sharing reductions are not enrolled ineligibly due to two reasons. One, being enrolled in a non-ESI MEC or being deceased. Exchanges are required to run data matching twice a calendar year. We do it once as part of the annual redetermination process, and then we do it a separate time mid-year. This year it'll be end of March, early April. And Pennie identifies those enrolled in coverage with APTC and CSR who are duly enrolled in non-ESI MEC. Non-ESI MECs include Medicaid, CHIP, Medicare, TRICARE, VA Care, and Peace Corps. Next slide, please. Okay. So if a customer enrollee is flagged as being enrolled in a non-ESI MEC or deceased, a warning notice is sent out, which includes the name of the enrollee who needs to provide documentation, the type of DMI data matching issue that the enrollee has, including the specific type of non-ESI MEC, and the adverse action that will occur if the DMI is not resolved. The reasonable opportunity, or ROP, is initiated and is 30 days. If the DMI is not resolved when the reasonable opportunity expires, their coverage will be terminated at the end of the month. A notice will be sent explaining that the ROP expired and the adverse action that was taken. Eligibility redetermined as no longer eligible for coverage through Pennie, and the change made to prevent customers from being duly enrolled. At this point, I'm going to hand it over to Hannah to talk about the unwinding and enrollment. Hannah, take it away.
Great, thank you, Joe. So we are going to talk about a really important topic that we talked a bit about. Actually, we've probably talked about it in most of our work groups for a while now, but we really started to dive into this last month. So this is the unwinding of the Medicaid continuous coverage requirements. Really, it's just, so we're using the term unwinding. It's really just regular Medicaid renewals that are going to be resuming starting in April of 2023. And so starting in April of 23 for the next 12 months, everyone that's currently enrolled in Medicaid or MA will be run through renewal and have their eligibility for Medicaid redetermined. The reason that this is an unwinding process is because of for basically the last 3 years now, since March of 2020, Medicaid has not been disenrolling anyone and not been redetermining whether people are eligible for Medicaid. And so starting in April, it's the first time they'll be doing that in over 3 years. And so it is a regular renewal process, but there's a lot of folks on Medicaid who've joined in that period of time, and there's expectation that there's going to be a lot of folks who, over that 12-month period, who are currently enrolled in Medicaid, will no longer be eligible for Medicaid and will lose that coverage and need to get coverage elsewhere. So some of those likely will be needing to get coverage through Pennie. So in last month's work group, we talked about the customer experience through the renewal process, and what they hear, how they're gonna know when their renewal is coming up, types of notices, what that renewal determination process looks like, and how we end up. There's 2 different key pathways where folks will end up with their Medicaid coverage terminating. So for today's session, we're going to pick up where that is and focus on, now that we have folks who have lost their Medicaid coverage, what is the process for them to actually enroll through Pennie? And we'll talk about we're going to first talk about some of the Pennie specific policies that are unique to the unwinding, and then we'll walk through step by step what these individuals will experience when they do come to Pennie. So go ahead and go to the next slide for me. There are 3 unique policies that are applicable only during this unwinding period. So this is starting April 1st of 23 through March of next year, so that 12-month period of time. And we'll go through each of these. So there's an income DMI, a little bit longer reasonable opportunity period for income DMIs. There's a longer special enrollment period whenever someone's losing other coverage. And there's the ability to have an earlier coverage start date for those who are losing Medicaid or CHIP. So we'll walk through each of these first. So go ahead and let's go to the next slide and go to income DMIs. So this is one, and we talked briefly about this last meeting, but I want to recap it here. Until basically the end of the Medicaid unwinding period, Pennie will be giving folks more time to resolve income DMIs. So normal DMI, the reasonable opportunity period, that's the period of time that you have to provide documents to resolve your DMI, is normally 90 days. For income DMIs only, and those that are occurring during this unwinding period, it'll be extended from 90 days to 150 days. And this extension is available for all Pennie customers, not just people who may have immediately lost their Medicaid coverage, and even people who've never been on Medicaid. This is just across the board. Everyone will get this additional time to resolve income DMIs. And in fact, it's actually we've already started that process. So you'll actually already now see in customers' accounts, you'll see the 150 days applied to the income DMIs at this point. So you will see those, the extension is already visible in the customer's account. You'll see that on the verifications page, that action due by date, as well as the date on their notices. So the date you're seeing is the date that includes the extension. And then of course, it is still a reasonable opportunity period for a DMI. If that DMI is not resolved by the end of that reasonable opportunity period, then because this is an income DMI, then the person would lose their financial assistance, just like has always happened with income DMIs. They're just going to have a bit longer time to provide that documentation. Very important that this is only for income DMIs, that they're the only ones that have the additional time. Non-income DMIs, they're still only going to have 90 days. You don't need to do all the math. It's going to be shown to you in the customer's account, but that's why you might see with one application, you might see different DMI due dates for income DMIs versus non-income DMIs. Okay. So that's the first Pennie specific unwinding policy. Let's go to the next one and get to our second one, which is regarding the loss of MEC SEP. So normally our SEP shopping periods are up to 60 days after the event, but during the unwinding period, folks who lose other coverage will be eligible for an SEP that is actually up to 120 days after their coverage end date. So the key things here are you have the coverage end date of whatever coverage you had, that has to be during the unwinding period. But that other coverage could be any other coverage. It could be Medicaid, or CHIP or employer sponsor coverage, it doesn't matter the type of coverage. Anyone who's losing other coverage, if you're losing that coverage with an end date during this unwinding period, you'll automatically be granted 120 days of length of an SEP instead of 60 days. So we've got an example, so we can walk you through when this will apply and when it won't. So on the left side, you're going to see example 1. This is someone who's losing coverage on 3/31 at the end of this month. That is not yet the unwinding period. So this is basically the current status quo. That person could shop starting next week, because the loss of MEC is one of those events that you can shop in advance of the event. Or they could shop in April or in May, and the coverage start date, of course, is based on when the shopping is completed. But once we get out of May, now we're more than 60 days from the event date being the date that coverage was lost. So, June, July, August, currently, that's too far out. Your SEP would have been closed. But if we look to example number 2, that's someone who has lost coverage at the end of May. That is during the unwinding period. So in that example, you'll see how this 120 days plays out. This person could shop for, all the way from into September and get coverage starting 10/1, and their SEP won't close until they get into October. That's when we'd be more than 120 days out. So key takeaways are this the 120-day SEP is for any type of loss of coverage. The coverage has to end during that unwinding period. And the coverage start dates, work as they normally do. You're well familiar with this, where it's the first of the month following the shopping. Okay. Go ahead, next slide. So when you report your life events, you'll see this. You should be, or yours are probably really familiar with this screen, right? When you go to your homepage, the customer's dashboard, you'll see the confirm event and shop button, which brings up the life change reporting screen. And you get the drop-down list of many, many, many different life events. You're going to see now that in addition to the usual loss of MEC that we've had since day 1, you're going to see another option in there, which is the loss of Medicaid or CHIP. That is the same underlying SEP as the loss of MEC, but because there's some specific eligibility, some specific policies that are unique to people losing Medicaid during the unwinding period, it is really important that if you're working with someone who has lost Medicaid, that they use the loss of Medicaid option and not the loss of MEC event option. Okay. Because otherwise they won't necessarily get the other benefits of the next policy that we're going to talk about. Okay, go to the next one slide for me. So this is our third Pennie specific, our Pennie unwinding specific policy, which is the option for the customer to choose an earlier coverage start date. This one, though, is only for people who are losing Medicaid or CHIP. So the previous one was shopping the SEP window extending from 60 days to 120 days. That is for anyone who's losing other coverage, no matter what type. The option for an earlier coverage start date, the one we're looking at now, that is limited just to folks who are losing Medicaid and CHIP. So the way this will work is obviously it's for folks who are losing the Medicaid or CHIP. So that's why it's really important you pick the right event reason. The coverage end date needs to be occurring during the unwinding period. The earlier coverage start date is only available for the first 60 days of your shopping period, not the whole 120 days. So if you are shopping in the, we've got an example. So I took that same example from the previous slide for that May 31st coverage end date. And we see that whole 120-day shopping period that we had just looked at, but now we have a new column showing at what points in time would the customer be eligible to potentially choose the earlier coverage start date. So we can see if the customer, so we lost coverage in May, at the end of May. In June, we're in our first month of the SEP. We could shop normally and get coverage starting July 1, or we could choose to opt and go actually have coverage back to June 1. And that's because we're in the first, at that point, we're still only in the first 30 days of our SEP window. You go to the next month, and we're still within the first 60 days, so we still have the ability to go either prospective to get 8/1 coverage or to choose that earlier coverage start date. But once you get to day 61 through 120 of that SEP window, you're still able to shop, but you're only able to shop prospectively. You do not have a choice for the earlier coverage start date. Okay. So go to the next slide so we can look at how this will work in the system. Again, this you have to use the loss of Medicaid event reason. The event date should always be the coverage end date of the person's MA. And in order to get that earlier coverage start date, like we said, you have to shop within no later than 60 days from that coverage end date. Okay, so you'll see when you do report this life event, you'll see some of that additional language here. It just says that we're able to, you are self-attesting to this SEP, so there's no documentation required. We are able to validate your eligibility for that with DHS behind the scenes as needed, but it is self-attested, so there's no documents that need to be uploaded before you're able to move forward with shopping. Great. So those are the 3 Pennie specific. Oh, sorry, I think I have one more screen. Go to the next slide so I can show you what it looks like when you get to plan shopping. So when you get to plan shopping, so you've reported your loss of MA, that coverage end date was within the unwinding period, and you're shopping during the first 60 days of your shopping period. When you meet all those criteria, when you then go to shop for plans, using that shop for plans button on the dashboard, at the very beginning of plan shopping, you'll get this new pop-up window that you see. It says select coverage start date. And that's because the system knows you are, at the point in time you're shopping, you're eligible for this earlier coverage start date. And so you'll see we default people to the normal start dates, which are first of the month following your shopping. But you can choose to opt in and select the earlier coverage start date if you are eligible under all those criteria we just talked about. And so they can decide if they want to change to look at the earlier coverage start date or not. Once you hit continue, then you'll go through shopping as normal based on whichever selection you made. If you, let's say you decide, okay, I'm going to go forward. In this case, it was for August 1 shopping, and you get to the shopping pages and you're like, maybe I want to go back and look at what it would be if I did opt into that earlier coverage start date. When you are in your plan shopping, there's and you have this option for the earlier coverage start date. You'll see on the bottom right, up at the top of your plan shopping, you'll have a new little link there that's going to say, go to the dashboard so I can change my coverage start date. You'll only have that link there if you're actually eligible to pick between your coverage start dates. But that way you can go back and say, I want to see what it looks like if I do the other option. And you can jump back and forth before deciding what makes the most sense for you. Great. So those are the 3 Pennie specific policies that apply during unwinding. So let's now look at how those are going to work and what the customer experience is going to be for those folks who have lost MA. So go to the next slide for me. Great. So for those who were on last month's webinar, you should be well familiar with this. This is what we talked about last time. And if you didn't see it, you can go review the deck and the recording. But what this is just showing is the process where folks are going to come in to have whatever their date is up during the unwinding period, they'll have their renewal completed and they will get a renewal determination with the 3 possible outcomes. First outcome is just the person's found eligible for Medicaid or CHIP. So they stay enrolled there. We're not going to really focus on that scenario. If the person, however, completes their renewal, Medicaid and DHS determines they are no longer eligible for Medicaid, that's when they get to scenario 2. Their coverage will be terminated and they'll get sent over to Pennie. So we'll talk a bit more on scenario 2, but the third scenario also is one that we're going to talk about. That's where someone does not actually complete their renewal with Medicaid. They don't respond to the packet and give the information that DHS needs to complete their determination. Those folks, they will lose their MA coverage, but their MA it's not an actual eligibility determination. Their MA is closed. And because basically DHS is not able to determine one way or the other. So it's a really important distinction because there's going to be a different experience if you're in that second bucket versus the third bucket. So let's start with the second options. These are folks who did their renewal, found out they were no longer eligible for Medicaid and were termed. And go to the next slide for me. Okay. So first thing we do, because these folks went through their renewal process with DHS, DHS will send their application information over to Pennie when they're terminating their Medicaid coverage. So and the MA notice is also going to tell the customer that you're no longer eligible for MA, but we're going to send your application over to Pennie to see if you might be eligible for coverage through Pennie. So Pennie will then take that information. We're going to go ahead and submit, process the application for them. We have updated information because the customer would have just recently provided that information to DHS as part of their Medicaid renewal. Next. And then we will, because we already have all of their information, we'll go ahead and submit that application and determine their eligibility for QHP with APTC and CSR. You'll notice that, normally when we're determining someone's eligibility for financial assistance, we first have to check, are they eligible for Medicaid or CHIP? And then we can only once we've ruled that out, can we then determine if they're eligible for APTC or CSR. In this scenario, we basically can skip the Medicaid and CHIP step because they just completed their Medicaid renewal, and as part of the renewal, we're determined not eligible. So, we don't have to also rerun the Medicaid check again. So we'll determine their eligibility next. And then because we have all the information, we know when they lost their MA coverage, we can actually go ahead and we will be reporting that life event for them. So that loss of Medicaid qualifying life event, we will report that for these folks, and it'll be automatically open up their SCP for them. And then the last thing we do, of course, is actually notify the customer next. And we'll send them a notice saying, hey, we got your information. Here's the steps that you need to take in order to enroll, your access code. And because we were able to do all these steps beforehand, they'll actually that notice will even include an eligibility summary. Okay. And then now it's up to the customer to come in and, but at this point, there's only 2 things left to do. Go ahead. They just have to go in and pick a plan within that 120 days from the date they lost their MA coverage and pay their first invoice, if they even have an invoice to pay, right? There are definitely people who are able to enroll in plans at no cost to them through Pennie. So there's a lot of these steps that we're able to do on behalf of folks so that they can come in and focus on just picking a plan and signing up. So this will be the majority of the people who come through that second scenario of the Medicaid renewal determinations. The majority of the time we'll be able to do this. But on occasion, we find folks that we're not able to run through this process. So go ahead and go to the next slide. There's going to be a minority of the cases where we're not able to generate eligibility automatically. Maybe we just need some piece of information updated or clarified. So this does happen sometimes, and so their flow is going to look slightly different. Next. So the first thing for them, they of course are also getting that MA notice saying DHS is sending their application to Pennie. So then we do next. We'll go ahead and submit their application, but all we're doing is actually starting their application and pre-populating it with all the information that we have. We can't submit it because we need them to come in and clarify some stuff. So we will then send them a notice that looks very similar to the notice that we just saw on the previous page. The difference being we don't have an eligibility determination to give them yet, so they won't see an eligibility summary. But it'll tell them how to come in and review their application and enroll if they want to. Next. So obviously, the first thing customers need to do is actually come in and review their application, make any updates they need to, and submit it so that we can run an eligibility determination. Just like in the previous scenario, these are folks who have just recently had their Medicaid found ineligible for Medicaid, so we can skip that step and we're really just jumping right into, are they eligible for QHP with APTC and CSR? Next. And then because we are not in open enrollment, just like normal, people have to report a life event. In this case, these folks are going to have to report the life event themselves. It's very straightforward, but they will have to report it themselves because we weren't able to do their eligibility and all of those steps beforehand for them. But it's pretty straightforward. You saw, right? Clicking your report life event, loss of Medicaid, and put your coverage end date in there. Next, and then obviously the same final steps, right? Shopping for a plan. They have the whole 120-day shopping period after their MA coverage ends, and then if appropriate, they need to pay their first invoice. So this can happen. This scenario will happen sometimes for folks that are in that second scenario of the Medicaid determined them to be no longer eligible. Most people are in the previous scenario where we're able to do a lot more on their behalf, but sometimes folks will fall into this scenario. So now let's pivot and look at the other scenario of where how folks can end up losing their MA coverage. For the next slide. So this is, I refer to as scenario 3. These are the folks who did not complete their Medicaid renewal. They didn't respond to the packet or whatever. And so their MA, they lost their MA coverage, but it was because their MA was closed. There's no eligibility determination there. So the two key things there was no eligibility determination as to whether or not they're eligible for Medicaid, and their application is not sent to Pennie. So after their MA is closed, this is an area, and we talked a bit about this last month, right? We're really doing a lot of different outreach to these folks to get them to take action after their MA has closed so that they can get coverage. So you'll see here, there's DHS is sending a targeted mailer there, telling them about, in addition to their normal renewal, the redetermination letter, just making sure they understand you can still come back in and do your renewal and give us your information as long as it's within 90 days and not have a lapse in coverage on their Medicaid. So there's option for that. Pennie, we will also be sending them information saying, if you need to get coverage, you can come to Pennie, but you'll fill out an application and we can determine, what your eligibility might be. So for this population who is MA closed, really the big key thing here is going to be on communication. I know Kelsey's going to talk about communications more later. We really just need to make sure that they understand that their MA has terminated and they need to take action to get coverage somehow, somewhere. And so that's a big focus. So let's talk about when these folks end up coming to Pennie and what that looks like for them. Next slide. So as I said, we're going to be sending out notices. Pennie, there are links on those previous slides for copies of all these full notices. The timing of our notice is going to be around 30 to 45 days after their MA has closed. That means we're already, potentially a month into their 120-day shopping window before they're even going to get that notice from us. They've gotten plenty of other notices in advance previously, but that's sort of the timing of when our first notice is going to go out to them. Next. But then let's say the customer does finally come into Pennie and they will be just like any other person coming into us right now, right? They're going to go ahead and submit their eligibility application. Key thing here, though, is it's really important that they know as you know, there's a part of the application that says, have you recently been denied eligibility for Medicaid or CHIP? These folks were not denied eligibility for Medicaid. Their coverage terminated, but they did not get found ineligible. So it's really important that they don't say, oh yeah, no, I was recently denied because I lost my coverage. It's not necessarily the same thing. So that becomes really important. Go to the next slide. Because for these folks, since they did not have an eligibility determination during their Medicaid renewal, we have to do a full eligibility determination, including potentially Medicaid eligibility. And that's why it's really important that they don't say that they were denied Medicaid. Because they might come in and be at, 50% FPL or 75% FPL. They should be in Medicaid at that point. And if they say that they were denied Medicaid, even worse, they might end up not getting being ineligible for Medicaid because they thought that they were ineligible, even though they didn't actually have an eligibility determination through Medicaid. And because they're under 100% FPL, they're not going to get any APTC or CSR through Pennie, for most people, right? So they could end up, falling into even worse position. It's really important that they know when they're completing this application that they did not get found ineligible for Medicaid, even though their Medicaid was terminated. So depending upon their eligibility, we might, if we find them potentially eligible for Medicaid, we will send their application to DHS to process and potentially, enroll them in Medicaid or CHIP. But let's assume that they, that process completes and they end up being QHP eligible next. Then we're, just like the previous flows, they're going to have to report that SEP. And same thing, because they're going to report that loss of MA, SEP, self-attested, they just need to provide the end date of their coverage. And then next, they can complete their shopping and enroll in a plan. They have the same 120-day shopping period as the other previous scenarios. But for these folks, they may not realize that they need to take any action until they're already into their 120-day period. So if, let's say, they just didn't realize they had to take action for their Medicaid renewal, they didn't ignore the notices, whatever, maybe the Pennie notice that they get is the first thing that they realize, oh my, I have to take action. Even if they immediately take action, they might already be 45 days into their 120-day SCP. So these folks, it's really important that as soon as they become aware that they have lost their MA coverage, they really need to take action right away, because they may have already used up a lot of that 120 days already just before they even became aware of where they are. Okay, and then last, one more slide here. There's a little bit of recap that we did add a few things. So I think the biggest takeaway from this session on unwinding and last month's session on unwinding is it's really important, especially for assisters and brokers who are helping customers, is to make sure that you are able to help a customer identify which path they are on. So yes, they lost their MA coverage, but were they found ineligible for MA, or did they just have their MA closed because they didn't complete the process? That has different, implications to what their experience is going to be for applying, and whether, what their eligibility needs to look like. They're still both eligible for all three of those Pennie-specific unwinding policies that we talked about. They're going to get the extra time for an income DMI. They'll get the 120 days for their SEP. They'll be able to, if they shop within those first 60 days, they'll be able to opt for an earlier coverage start date if they want. But their experience is going to be very different, because some of these folks in the second bucket, those people, a lot of them, we're going to be able to do a lot of these steps for them, and they can just come in and shop. Whereas folks in the MA closed bucket are going to really need to be a lot more proactive and becoming aware and initiating the action themselves. And so it's all important that we really make sure that we are clear when you're working with someone where they are in the process. And just remembering to, this unwinding process is happening over a 12-month period of time. We've had some folks reaching out to us saying, well, what do I do? All of the people I've ever worked with who are on Medicaid are going to lose their coverage on April 1st. No, that's not the case. Everyone has they're assigned their renewal month. It's spread out across 12 months. And so they'll be getting notices in advance saying, okay, your renewal date is whatever, and then that's when they'll be processed. It doesn't mean that everyone is being dropped off of Medicaid on April 1st. So that's the other thing just to keep in mind, that it's important that you figure out what that person's renewal date is, and that will tell you where they are in the process. And then if they have lost their MA, then figuring out which of these scenarios are they in, the not eligible or the MA closed. Okay. Great, so we're going to keep talking about unwinding a lot, I think, and you guys keep your questions coming, but it is getting ready to start. Medicaid has already started with some of the processing of their first batch of renewals, so it is well underway. I'm going to hand it over to Kelsey to talk about some of the resources that include a lot of really good stuff on unwinding and other things. So Kelsey, it's all yours.
Thank you, Hannah, and good morning, everyone. Again, I am Kelsey, Pennie's Marcom manager. We just wanted to take a quick second to remind you of some of Pennie's resources that are always available to you. Pennie's resources and materials can be found at agency.pennie.com/toolkit. This webpage includes Pennie collateral, the print materials request form. It also includes our current Path to Pennie toolkit, which has social post digital graphics pertaining to that campaign for your use. And then coming soon, we will also be adding in a Pennie-specific unwinding toolkit for the medical assistance unwinding that Hannah just talked about. This will include collateral specific to Pennie and the unwinding, social posts, both in English and Spanish, as well as graphics that you can for your use. This toolkit, as well as the stakeholder talking points, will be emailed out here in the next few weeks. And those talking points will also have links to the materials and communications that Hannah was mentioning, like the notice and that co-branded mailer. So that should be on its way shortly. You can also find helpful materials right now on the PADHS unwinding webpage that's linked right here. This site has a ton of materials for that DHS is developing that you can for the unwinding, as well as co-branded materials, and we have some of our Pennie collateral on there as well. And as always, you can find helpful information at agency.pennie.com/assisters and agency.pennie.com/brokers. These pages include FAQs, manuals and guides, links to the workgroup materials, and also links to our past Lunch and Learn materials. And we also just wanted to remind everyone who is interested that you can sign up to be a DHS helper throughout the unwinding. That link is down at the bottom of this slide. DHS helpers will receive communications from DHS and Pennie throughout the unwinding with messages and materials to help spread the word within your organizations about the unwinding. And then also the link another link at the bottom there is the DHS unwinding webpage, which also includes a robust list of FAQs and links to past webinars that they have held for your awareness. All right, and then I believe I am passing it back over to Marie to wrap up.
Thanks, Kelsey. So that wraps up today's presentation. Thank you, Hannah, Joe, and Kelsey for your participation today. But before ending today's session, we just want to let you know how you can help. Next, please. Spread the word by sharing Pennie's information on your social media platforms. Continue educating your customers on new ways to enroll. Help us inform customers about changes or action items needed. As far as the programs to communicate, that includes Path to Pennie. This is where an individual can fill out a Rev 1882 form when they file their PA tax return, so that they can come in through a QLE. We also have the income QLE for those customers whose income is equal to or below 150% FPL, and of course the unwinding of medical assistance that Hannah just covered. Be sure that the customers have up-to-date contact information with DHS so that they can receive communication regarding the unwinding. We do have some time for some questions, so I'll start with, let's see, Katie's question. For the search option. Oh, sorry.
Oh, sorry. Go ahead.
Yep.
Yeah, we've got a few that folks have queued up for us to talk about, if that's okay.
Sure, yeah.
So we've seen a number of questions here around how related to the unwinding, and how would you know when someone is what their MA coverage end date is, or how would they know what their MA coverage end date is, given that everyone might have different renewal dates. So that information would be available on their MA renewal packet and their determination notices that are sent to them. So that should tell them very clearly what the notices they get before their renewal will tell them. There's like a 90-day notice, 90 days beforehand, 60 days beforehand, 30 days beforehand. And so that'll give them their tell them very clearly what their renewal due date is. And then after their renewal is completed, either they get an eligibility determination or their MA is closed, they'll get a notice that tells them, the outcome. If their MA has terminated, it'll include, when their MA ends. That's the key date, the date that their MA coverage ends. That's the key date that they need to know when they're going to be applying through Pennie. If they are one of the folks who is in that second scenario, the one where they were found ineligible, they completed their renewal, they were found ineligible for Medicaid, and their application was sent to Pennie, we actually receive, from DHS, along with their application, we also receive the MA coverage end date. So that's why we're able to pre-populate and submit that SEP for them. So those folks don't even have to know what their MA coverage end date is. We'll already know that and have that submitted for them. But there's other folks who will have to actively report their life event of their losing Medicaid, and they'll need to know what their coverage end date is. And so it's really important. They'll need to know if they have access to those notices that they receive from Medicaid. That's where they would find that information, and especially people in that scenario where they didn't complete their renewal and they just had their MA closed without a determination. Those folks, we're not going to get any information from their application or their coverage end dates. So those folks really do need to use that notice to know exactly what that coverage end date was with Medicaid. And then a couple questions about, someone mentioned that they noticed that some folks are currently getting their Medicaid renewal packets, and whether they would be eligible for the 120-day SEP period or not. And the answer is yes. The first couple of months of, at least 2 months, I think, of Medicaid renewals, those first 90-day notices have started going out. So there are people who are getting those notices. The 120-day SEP and their eligibility for all of those special kind of unwinding specific policies, that is all determined based on their MA coverage end date. So even someone who has already received their notice that their MA renewal is coming up, their coverage won't end until after April 1. And that's why that's the cutoff date for the start of these unwinding policies. So even those folks who've already started getting renewal information, it's all their eligibility for these policies is based on their MA coverage end date, and that will not be prior to April. That'll be the first MA coverage end dates possible. I think we had one other on the MA. Yeah, a really great question here about for the folks who are in that scenario 3, the ones who didn't complete the renewal packet, their MA was closed. The question is, would we recommend that you submit an application on Pennie, and knowing that it might be transferred to MA, or submit it directly to Compass? Honestly, we just want them to submit an application. Whichever way you go, if you start by applying to Pennie, and if it turns out that the person is likely eligible for Medicaid, we'll handle getting that information to Medicaid. If you go to Compass and complete the determination through Medicaid, and if Medicaid finds you ineligible, then Medicaid will send you that application over to Pennie. So it will depend a little bit on, you might want to make if you know for certain that you're this person almost certainly is above Medicaid thresholds, then maybe you would want to start with Pennie. That might make more sense. But the key thing for those folks is just to get the action started and get them processing, because they're the ones who likely are kind of going to be already into their 120-day SEP by the time they realize that they need to take some action. So if whichever pathway you go, applying through Compass or through Pennie, if you are eligible for the other of those things, we will send applications back and forth so people will get the appropriate eligibility. Okay. And then can I, Marie, do one more quick one? There are a few questions about the earlier coverage start date option and like how the premiums would work. So yes, it's a I didn't really go into it on the screen, and there is some language on the page that customers see. What customers will see in their plan shopping is just what a normal single month's premium would be. But if you select the earlier coverage start date option, they may have to pay more than 1 month of premium to effectuate their coverage. So there is a warning message on that pop-up that shows them the choice of coverage start dates right at the beginning of plan shopping, where it defaults them to the prospective shopping. And it tells them, if you choose the earlier coverage start date, you might have to pay multiple months of premium to get your coverage just started. And so making them fully aware of that before they choose that option. That's also why we defaulted them to the prospective shopping, because that we don't want people to be surprised by having to potentially pay more than 1 month of premium to effectuate that coverage, and have that potentially be a reason that they don't effectuate their coverage. So there is that that trade-off that comes with if you are to take the earlier coverage start date. But within the plan shopping, you're still only ever going to see like what a normal monthly premium would be in the shopping. Okay. And I realize we're at time, so I'll hand it back, Marie.
Thank you so much, Hannah, for the valuable information you've shared today. If you can go to the next slide, please. We just want to say that lastly, we want to hear from you. We have our Pennie call contact center phone number listed there for you, as well as the hours. And we would also like your feedback on any community partner work group topics that you would like to have presented, and you feel would be beneficial for you and your team for discussion in these sessions. Send them your way. We will definitely take a look and try to promote or include in these sessions. Thank you for attending. We value your time and we look forward to presenting next month. Take care, happy Friday, and keep smiling. Bye now.